Help us tonight as we do another Christological overview of Jeremiah and a work attributed to him known as Lamentations. Teach us your word from cover to cover, but also teach us how to understand your word in view of Jesus' words in Luke 24:27, that all of the Old Testament was pointing to him. So help us to see these things, I pray, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. So tonight we're looking at Jeremiah and Lamentations. Is there any possible way to thoroughly cover the book of Jeremiah in a 20-minute window? No. Shall we try? Sure. Because remember, the purpose of what we're doing on Wednesday nights is to become not only more familiar with the Old Testament, but I'm trying to do this in more of a chronological order. It's not been perfect. I mean, I did the book of Job when it was likely written by Moses, or at least that's speculation. But we're trying to do that, and now we've made our way to past the time when the northern kingdom of Israel fell, when Samaria was conquered in 722 BC. And now we're heading into the territory of the time of the southern kingdom between 722 BC and 586 BC. So, hence you'll see, now I don't have 722 up there, I'm jumping way ahead into the story to that first year where we know Jeremiah is prophesying. But here we go. The prophet Jeremiah is prophesying to the people of the southern kingdom known as Judah. What's their capital? Jerusalem. Some before the fall of the southern kingdom, some of his prophecy comes after the fall. What year was the fall? And I know there's a little bit of a debate here, but for the most part, on the map there, where's the fall of the southern kingdom? I can't hear you whispering. There we go. Judah falls. 2 Kings 25:9, I think it is. Nebuchadnezzar burns the temple to the ground. That's the temple Solomon had erected. So that's 586, just for time frame. The human author is considered to be the prophet Jeremiah, and he is mentioned here just a couple places in the New Testament. He is mentioned in Matthew chapter 2 as well as Matthew chapter 16. He is mentioned as a real person, much like Jesus spoke of Jonah as a real person, being swallowed by a great fish as a real event, not metaphor, but real. Well, Jeremiah is also referred to as a real person. The folks who try to basically allegorize or make the Old Testament a metaphor, or even chunks of it a metaphor, I'm like, what are you doing? It's called biblical liberalism. No, we hold to the authority of Scripture and that it is truly and fully the Word of God. Tonight, I'm actually using my New American Standard. I normally teach and preach from the English Standard Version, but I almost always get the inductive study Bible that comes through Precept Ministries, and I have more notes in my New American Standard Version, so that's why I brought it out. Let's consider Jeremiah. We're going to start here. If you look in chapter 1 of Jeremiah, says here in verse 2, I'm skipping verse 1 that speaks of him being from Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord, or Yahweh, came in the days of Josiah. Josiah reigned from 640 BC to 609, but he came in the days of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, in the 13th year of his reign. So Josiah is in year 13, which is going to put us right there at 627, 628 BC. So this is why I have that Jeremiah, his prophecy begins. And I'm just writing prophecy begins. I'm not writing Jeremiah's name because that's who we're talking about, so hopefully you'll know that. Something interesting is that he prophesies for over 5 decades. 5+ decades. It is not an easy or even pleasant ministry. His own family tries to have him killed. Why? Because he speaks the word of God, and they didn't want that. They didn't like what they were hearing. You'll notice I have the date 539 BC. Well, there's a reason for that, because that's typically recognized as the year when the first exiles who had been in Babylon begin to return back to the land. 539 to 609 BC, you have a 70-year window. Why is 70 years significant? Prophecy. The prophet Jeremiah, the Lord is saying it through him, that the people of the southern kingdom will be conquered by the Babylonians. We know that in the book of Habakkuk as well. Chaldeans and Babylonians are the same. Chaldeans are southern Babylonians. They're the rednecks. But he says it will be for 70 years. And it was. You'll notice in the middle of the book of Jeremiah, there's a false prophet named Hananiah. I like to refer to him as the Joel Osteen of their day, because he said what you wanted to hear. And he comes on and he preaches, and God's not going to do that. In just 2 years, we'll be brought back and everything's going to be great. And Jeremiah, in essence, applauds like, man, that's awesome. You're a dead man, because you're lying. You're telling them what they want to hear, but it's not what God said. By the way, Jeremiah tells Hananiah when he'll be dead, and guess when he died? When Jeremiah said he would die. So that's what we've gone on between 609 and 539, is that 70-year window. 2 Chronicles 36 talks about how God said it will be 70 years, and he took them there. Why 70? Does anyone know off the top? Just random 70? Every 7 years, the people were supposed to observe a Sabbath year.
So instead of rest, it was,
Yeah.
it's 7 times 10.
Yeah.
So
Well, basically they ignored that 70 times.
Mm-hmm.
And God says, you owe me. And you thought that payment wasn't going to be required. Payment's due, and you're going to pay. And people say, you're making God sound mean. No, he's not mean at all. Because anything we have is a gift from the Lord. And he says, look, these are the parameters I've put in place. When you rest on that seventh day instead of working, you're trusting me, your provision. Remember, when the Israelites came out of Egypt and he began to provide the manna, he said, you go out every morning and you collect what you need per person. But on the seventh day, don't you do it. The sixth day, you'll have a double portion, so you can get enough. Any other day of the week, if you get more than you need, it will turn to worms. But on this particular day, I will give it to where you get 2 days' portion, and that will not turn to worms. Now, how's that? Because God is sovereignly ruling over this. God put the Sabbath in there as a blessing for mankind. But he also gave those Sabbath years, and they ignored them because they're like, man, that's a lot of money going to waste. Not only is it not going to waste, but now you're honoring yourselves rather than the Lord, and he's going to collect. This is where people go, now the preacher's talking about we better give money to God. Here's what I want to tell you. God is gracious and has given us much, and actually asks for very little. But I think it's one of the best things when you have a gracious, giving heart. It's one of the first lessons I learned. But anyway, they've ignored that, so payment is coming due. Let me give you this. This is under the basic details of Jeremiah, as his prophecy goes somewhere between 627 and about 570, roughly, BC. By word count, I'm talking about in the Hebrew Bible, Jeremiah is actually lengthier than Isaiah. You say, wait, Isaiah's 66 chapters, and Jeremiah's 52 chapters. Did the Hebrews have scrolls or books with chapters? Scrolls. They didn't have chapter and verse divisions. Jeremiah is lengthier by word count, and it would have been a bigger scroll than that of Isaiah. Here's something that I think will be beneficial for you. Jeremiah is largely not chronological. So keeping up with the flow can be difficult. So in your study of the book, look for time indicators. But unlike where you would read in the Genesis storyline of we have Adam and Eve, we have Noah, we have Abraham, we have Isaac, we have Jacob, we have the 12 tribes, it doesn't flow like that. Just doesn't. So what you're looking for are particular prophecies, particular visions that God gives, and you study them with regard to what the whole of Jeremiah is about. He's very young when God called him in chapter 1, verse 6. He's young, and initially he says, hey, I'm not able to do this. Yet he has this ministry of over 50 years. Now, one of the things that my Southern Baptist brethren sometimes do, and I don't like it, is we become very pragmatic. And we'll look at someone like Jeremiah and we'll say, well, he didn't have a very effective ministry because not many people came to know the Lord. But boy, that Jonah, he preached and a whole lot of people believed. And I'm like, you really want to compare those two? I wouldn't. Jeremiah, though a fellow sinner, was a faithful man of God. And I'm glad about that. So let's not get into this pragmatic, well, let's emulate Jonah, i.e. we'll get more converts. No, that's up to the Lord. Let's be faithful and not run away from God's call. He prophesies to the southern kingdom of Judah, and most of his messages are that of judgment, but there are messages of hope. Which do you think people will not want to hear? They don't want judgment. I want to hear everything's fine. But what if everything's not fine? Do you still need to hear that? Yes. If you knew something was wrong with your body physically, you knew it, and it just wasn't like I had some bad pizza the night before, but you knew, like, man, something's wrong. And it's been this way for not just a few days, but for even weeks now, something's wrong. And you know you've got to make that appointment to go see the doctor. And you hope that the doctor goes, oh, here's what it is. It's actually very simple. Here's some Pepto. But you fear the doctor saying, yes, something is wrong. Something is very wrong. Nobody wants to hear that. I get it. But I would rather know what the something is so we know how to deal with it than to have a charlatan say, oh, everything's fine. Everything's not fine. Let's look at the events and themes. Chapter 1, and I'm just, like I said, we're being very brief here with Jeremiah. Chapter 1 is basically the call of God on Jeremiah's life. We do have a rod of an almond tree and a boiling pot. I'm not going to go into those specifics tonight. That's not what we're doing. But then here's the biggest chunk. Chapters 2 through 45. Most of the book, God, through the prophet Jeremiah, is telling them, I'm going to judge you because of your idolatry. Some of the things that were happening, they were offering their to Moloch. They were putting their children in the fire, literally, and their children died, literally. Spiritual adultery. What have these people witnessed not too many years ago, or at least their relatives? What did they witness? The northern kingdom did these kinds of things, and what did God do? He warned them, and when they didn't heed the warnings, he sends Hosea, Amos, even Jonah. They do not receive those warnings, and God raises up the Assyrians, conquers the northern kingdom. Samaria, the capital, is taken, and they are no more. They had plenty of evidence of, if we keep going down this road, here's what we can and should expect. The bulk of, I'll say this, when you're reading Jeremiah devotionally, you watch your heart, because I remember a particular time when I was going through in my year, read through the Bible in a year, and I was in Jeremiah there for I think I was doing 3 chapters a day, so I was there 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I'm from Saudi Daisy, I don't do math well. But I remember thinking, man, my spirit's just low. Well, duh. You're reading about judgment, judgment, judgment. And I'm not saying don't read it, but you might want to add some additional Bible reading to what you're doing that's a little more joyful. In addition to that there in Jeremiah. But chapters 2 through 45, God warns Judah and tells them judgment is coming. But I want someone to turn to chapter 23. And I want someone to turn to chapter 31. Who would volunteer? These are just, in one it's 2 verses, and one it's 4 verses. Who would volunteer Jeremiah chapter 23? Who's got that? I don't see a hand. Come on, don't fight over it, but somebody's got to volunteer. I'll read it.
23 what?
23 verses 5 and 6, and just hold your place there.
Okay.
And how about chapter 31? Who's that, Leslie? Or Natalie? 31 verses 31 to 34. Just hold your place. Because as bad as this large section of judgment is, God reminds his people, I am going to remind you of hope. So in chapter 23, verses 5 and 6, smack dab in the middle of all of this gloom, would you read that, Mr. Jones?
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days, Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely. And this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness.
How's that sound? Who's he talking about? Messiah, yeah. Doesn't say the name Jesus there, but it's Messiah. Right there in the midst of very difficult, dark messages, there's hope. Now you're going to go through the darkness first, but I promised to send a Messiah, and I'm going to keep that promise. Natalie, chapter 31. This is the new covenant. This is one of the best parts of the book. But chapter 31, and here's something you will notice about the book of Jeremiah. Not only are the chapters lengthy, but the verses are lengthy. You're like, well, it's only got this many verses. Look how long they are. You won't find any Jesus wept length verses in Jeremiah. Natalie, would you read Jeremiah 31, verses 31 to 34?
Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke. Though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. For the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more.
A lot of darkness and a lot of gloom, and God says, but the day is coming. The day is coming when I will make this new covenant. Now, when you read the letter to the Hebrews in the New Testament, the basic theme is Jesus is greater. He's the greater revelation, the greater revealer. He's the greater prophet, the greater priest. He's the one bringing the greater covenant. This is incredible. And what I notice here, just in part, is number one, he's mentioning Israel, and Israel's not there. They're gone. How can you raise that which is no longer? Well, you go to Ezekiel, where God takes the prophet Ezekiel in this vision of the valley of dry bones, and he asks the question, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel has the best response. Well, you know, I don't. And he says, prophesy, speak my word. And he does. And in this vision, the bones come together and the sinews and the flesh, and they live again. God says, I can take that which is dead and make it alive. And he will do that. Also, I love there in verse 34, I will forgive their iniquity and their sin. I will remember no more. What an incredible reminder of God's mercy and his grace. Obviously, I love those parts of this very dark section. I do want to touch on very quickly, just so you all won't think I'm getting too soft. I've got to have my rough edginess. Sometimes I've been known to scold people. I love Jeremiah chapter 29, and I love verse 11. You know the verse well, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Those are wonderful words. Here's what you've got to get. I see the plaques on the wall with that. Usually it's just the Jeremiah 29:11. It doesn't have the verse. And people can recite it. But I have been known to say, what was going on when those words were spoken? And I rarely ever get a response. Well, I don't know. Well, let me tell you what was going on. We're not quite here. In fact, we're not even quite here. God is saying, you are committing spiritual adultery against me. And just because the bottom hasn't fallen out, don't be deceived. You think everything's fine? It isn't. You are running from me. I am not the love of your life. But I've got good plans for you. I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, and they're going to conquer you and take you from your homes to their land where you will be captives. You're going to lose it all. I have good plans for you. Now, this is where everyone goes, that sounds horrible. How can that be a good plan? Because that's what it's going to take for you to see me again. And what good is it if you go live your life for yourself and you accumulate possessions, you build the house of your dreams, you have all that you want, and you don't know me? What good is that? How much better to lose all of that, but see who I truly am and that I'm your only hope, and you turn to me and I rescue you. Folks, that's the better stuff. So this verse, I'm not trying to be a killjoy, but God, when he says, I know the plans that I have for you, here are the plans. You're about to be taken as captives. And it's going to be painful and gut-wrenching. You're going to leave your homes and be taken a long way away as captives. Because that's what it's going to take to open your eyes and bring you to repentance. These are good plans. Not the plans any of us would pick. Certainly not the plans that the prosperity movement will preach, but this is my plan, and it's good, and it is for a future and a hope. Well, how can that be about a good future and good hope? Because you're going to come to your senses. Nobody's going to cover for you. No one's going to keep enabling you in your sin. You're going to hit bottom, and you're going to look up to me again. Does that sound like a good future and a good hope? Yeah. Does it sound like fun getting there? No. It's a great verse, but don't misuse it. Please, please don't misuse it. Let's look at the third line here under events and themes, chapters 46 through 51. Just in case all of the people of the southern kingdom are like, man, God just hates us, and Jeremiah, who are you? We don't want to listen to you. And I haven't heard anything bad about these nations. God says, oh, don't worry, I'm going to deal with them too. It's God's judgment on the nations. They will not get away with this. And we've even alluded to that in prior Wednesday meetings where, even though we haven't gotten to the book of Habakkuk, when Habakkuk says, God, you're not doing anything about the unrighteousness in your land. And God says, oh, I'm doing something. You wouldn't believe it if I told you, but I'm going to tell you. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. They're going to lay low my people. And Habakkuk's like, well, that makes no sense. He goes, but then I will restore y'all, but I'm going to deal with them too. God will raise up nations to discipline his people. And those nations will think, aha! Who is their God? And God says, oh, I'm going to show you. Egypt did that. Egypt did that, and God brought restitution. The Assyrians did that, God brought restitution. The Babylonians will do that, God will bring restitution. He says their judgment is coming too. And then you get to chapter 52, and it is a sad chapter. because this is where you actually see the fall of the southern kingdom. You look at chapter 52, verse 13, speaking of Nebuchadnezzar, he burned the house of the Lord, that's the temple, the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem, every large house he burned with fire. Verse 15, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away into exile some of the poorest of the people. This, chapter 52 is rough, folks. It is. It's very rough. But here's what I take encouragement from. Through Jeremiah, God said, these things are going to happen. Did they happen? Yes, they did. Does God know what he's talking about? Yes, he does. If the prophecies concerning judgment came to fruition, as painful as they are, what promises that he makes of restoration? Are those going to come to pass too? Absolutely. We know even now that we live in a world that's fallen and it's discouraging, and we see rampant ungodliness even in the church. People don't take the Word of God seriously. They don't, when's the last time you read the book, you know? We have time to text, we have time to do social media. Well, I showed up at church on Sunday. No. That kind of silliness goes on. And as dark and as bad as it might be, and it might get worse, is Jesus Christ going to come again? Is he going to come again?
Amen.
Is anyone going to stop him? Will anyone ever defeat him? Psalm 2, the nations, they rage, they plot, they scheme. And God says, you won't be able to do it. Much of Jeremiah is at least eye-opening, if not discouraging, but don't lose sight of the main theme. God will judge his people severely, but never cut them off completely. Messiah will come. Messiah will come. There's a lot of hope in Jeremiah. You just have to look for it. Questions or statements? None? Leslie.
I do appreciate the scriptures that God is reminding them that he's looking for pride. He refers to himself as the husband.
Yeah.
And he's showing who his intended is, even though she's unfaithful.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, it has to be such a contrast for the Jews to see that here you have a prophet that wept over sin and prophesied to the nations, and it had to be like the hardest job ever, and hardly anybody turned to repent. And I don't know if they didn't believe it didn't apply to them, because that's what we do in America.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by so much stuff that it's hard to believe that, could we be one of these? And then, how does it look to the Jew for someone like Jonah who didn't want to go preach to Nineveh and tell them to repent? That God's ways are higher than ours, and I appreciate he kept that relational term with them in the midst of all this judgment. He's reminding them he's the price, and he's got a chosen bride. They still need salvation through Jesus Christ, but he's reminding them of the ultimate relationship there in heaven.
What prophet to the northern kingdom did we hear this in?
Yeah.
Hosea.
Yeah.
Hosea. This is what it's like to be in covenant marriage with you. I'm faithful, you're not. You keep running to the idolatry, sexual immorality block, and I keep pursuing you. Yeah. But and just to see that God is, he's merciful. We don't want to make light of that, like, well, he's merciful and he's fuzzy. No, he deals with sin, but he is merciful. And he's a pursuing God. He really is. Yeah. I think people in churches today, I've talked to people, where I've had concerns about them, and they're like, well, man, I've been in church all my life. I try to do more good than bad. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, tell me about your hunger for God and his word. Well, I don't know. And I'm not trying to be like mean seminary guy, but I'm just saying, man, the fruit of your life doesn't scream that Jesus is the one you're following. You pursue this, that. Well, I serve at church. don't forget what Jesus said about a group of false prophets who will say, Lord, Lord. And he's like, I never knew you. But we were leading your churches, and I never knew you. People become comfortable with a false sense of knowing God when I think it's alarming how many people might be there. I don't know. I hope I'm wrong. But if nothing else, we're going to move to Lamentations. And by the way, why did I write 609 BC? And there's a little bit of debate here. Some would say 605. They're wrong. No, but 605, 609, it's roughly in that time period. But what happens is Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is going to lay siege to Jerusalem. So he begins to surround the city here. How many years is this between this? How many? Do you math. 25. Got that Saudi math in your Hicks and grad. A quarter of a century, they see it every day. They're out there. They're out there. When this conflict between Russia and the Ukraine was coming, and President Biden was even saying, we know that he's going to attack. We know that. Now, it was obviously much more imminent, but you would watch the news. You're like, well, they haven't made a move yet. And then all of a sudden, here's the invasion. You know the Ukrainians had to be terrified. Well, imagine being in the southern kingdom and going like, what's going on out there? That's the Babylonian army. And more troops coming. And more troops coming for a quarter of a century until finally he lays siege there in 586. When we get to Lamentations, a lot of Jeremiah's prophecy is before this. Some of it is after. The book of Lamentations is here and a little bit after. Now, I've got it in your notes that it's between 586 and 539. It's a lot closer to this than this. Why do I say 539? Because it's before the exiles come home, the first group of exiles. And that starts in 539 BC, roughly. Basic details. It's traditionally thought that the prophet Jeremiah is the human author of these laments. And it is written shortly thereafter, 586 BC, when Jerusalem falls and the temple is burned to the ground. So in Lamentations 1, you actually read about the destruction of Jerusalem. Chapter 1, verse 1, how lonely sits the city that was full of people. She has become like a widow who was once great among the nations. She who was a princess among the provinces has become a forced laborer. What a painful verse, right? Jerusalem has fallen. Even though it was just a building, it was consecrated for the glory of God, and it's burned to the ground. Some of our families have been taken off already. I mean, it's just a dark, dark time. Chapter 2, you hope that it's going to take a turn, but what you find is God had every right to bring this judgment, and he did bring it. Accusation against him that this is unfair, this is unjust. God could say, I was so patient with you. In chapter 2, verse 14, God says, your prophets have seen for you false and foolish visions, and they have not exposed your iniquity so as to restore you from captivity, but they have seen for you false and misleading oracles. You listened to prophets who told you what you wanted to hear and would not confront you over your sin. My true prophets will tell you all of what I want to say, and they will confront you like Jeremiah did, and you tried to kill him for it. You told Amos to go home. Well, that was the northern kingdom. You don't want to hear about it, but I want you to hear about it. So sometimes people might ask, Darrell, are you worried that people might not come to Grace Fellowship because, well, let's just face it, you're a little harsh, you're a little sarcastic, and I get that I can improve in communicating graciously, but I will never apologize for speaking about sin. I won't do it. And I will never let this church or any other tell me, well, you can't talk about that. We have to talk about that. Folks, and I'm going to preach for a minute. I know this is more teaching than that, but I'm going to preach for a moment. And I sound like I'm bashing the Southern Baptist Convention, which I grew up being a part of. And I don't think it's only the SBC, but in my 50 years on this earth, we had what was called revivalism. There's a problem with ism there. It wasn't really, I think there were moments of revival, but we had a lot of revivalism. Put up posters, invite people, have music, have this preacher, and we'll get a lot of people. You can never schedule revival, I'll just tell you. Revival comes when God sends it. But what I have found in Scripture and even historically, revival is always preceded by God confronting His people over their sin. God brings brokenness, they are sorrowful, they are repentant, God brings restoration. Revivalism says, let's just have good music and a good speaker and get everybody excited, and it lasts for about a week maybe. If you want real revival, then this is what you need to ask God for, and this is what I need to ask God for. God, confront us over our sins. And this is not about, well, Jesus has forgiven me. No, we're not talking about what happened in your past. I'm talking about where we are as a church today. We need to be able to say, God, search us, try us, expose our sin, confront us over our sin, bring us to repentance, Lord. Because without that, there won't be revival. There won't be. So, now that I've got you all down and sad, look at chapter 3. Chapter 3, one of the best parts of the book, starts in verse 26. Starts in verse 22. The Lord's righteousness indeed, or righteousness is plural, indeed never cease, for His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Does anyone know of a hymn that is similar to those words? Great is thy faithfulness. The words of that hymn, and I love that hymn. Hymna, however you say the word. Those words are again written in very dark times. So everything doesn't have to be swimmingly wonderful. It can be the darkest of times, and the people of God should respond to God with this. Morning by morning, Lord, your mercies are new. Every morning they're new. Great is thy faithfulness. And when Darrell doesn't feel like saying that, and Darrell doesn't feel like that's true, it doesn't make it not true. So when I'm in those spiritual funks where I'm like, ugh, I need to remember, God, it is true that you're faithful. I need to sing to you. I need to praise you, even though I don't like what's going on. Because, well, Lamentations 3 is wonderful. Or at least this portion of it. Chapter 4, Jerusalem is taken. This is the recounting of the taking of Jerusalem. The people are desperate. And then chapter 5, the entire chapter is a prayer. Oh God, restore us. God, restore us. A major theme of Lamentations is that now God's judgment has come. But even in judgment, He shows mercy to His people. And in chapter 3, verse 26, says this, it is good that He waits silently for the salvation of the Lord. God saves. God saves. So, thoughts or questions? Either you are just so discouraged, or you already know so much about Jeremiah and Lamentations, or you have a problem with me and you're like, we'll talk later. Okay, Rusty.
Do you think Jeremiah wrote Lamentations?
I do.
Okay.
I do. I wasn't there, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it fit, the timing fits, and traditionally the Jews have seen that as Jeremiah is the most likely author. So, Yeah. Why would God put an entire, now, again, we don't have chapters and verses in the actual Old Testament scrolls, but why would God in the book? I mean, a lot of it's just discouraging. Yeah, that's right. And child, I'm reminding you, when you walk according to the flesh, you're going to reap according to it. I don't want you to walk this way, and you don't have to. I don't think any Israelite or any person of the southern kingdom would have ever looked at that temple that Solomon built. Not that they would have thought it would have been forever and ever and ever, because buildings eventually do wear out on the earth. I doubt that any of them in that window of time leading up to 586 ever thought, yesterday that building was standing and now it's gone. How did this happen? How did we get here? I'm gonna use this from personal experience. I remember counseling a married couple. Don't worry, you wouldn't know them. I'm not going to divulge any information. And I remember these words from the man. He said, we met. We had such a love for one another. We couldn't spend enough time together. In church, going to church, having children, our family in the things of God. And then this was his question. How did we get here? Where their marriage was almost dissolved. Because how can you go from being so enamored and so in love and so enthralled in the presence of this person to where now just sitting here, it is painful to be in the same room? How did we get here? And then you're forced to look at the track of, well, it was this to this to this to this to this to this to this. And that's what you see. God, how did we get here? How did we get here? Doesn't happen overnight usually. It's usually gradual, a slope that's gradual, but nonetheless a slope. Right now we are in a high season because we're still so new. But may we not be naive enough to think that we couldn't get right where they were. Because we could, folks. May God continually keep his word before us. Prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. The man who wrote those words actually then did later leave the God that he said that he loved. I love that old hymn. Prone to leave the God I love. And years later, he sat across from a lady in a carriage who read the poem, because at the time it was a poem, and she said, listen to these wonderful words, and as she read them, he said, ma'am, please read them no more, for the one who penned them sits across from you now. Okay, that's discouraging. Is there still hope in the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations? It is Christ. It is always Christ. Is there hope even in countries that largely neglect God? Yes, because the people of God, I believe, are on every continent, except maybe Antarctica. Is that a continent? There's hope because of Christ, but only because of Christ. That's all I've got for you. Anything else?
You know, when you're talking about the couple saying how they get there.
Yeah.
We did mission work in Brazil for 6 years, and we come back only once every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I came back, I could see how much older my parents were. When you're with someone day in and day out, the aging is still occurring. You just don't
Recognize it.
see it. You have to look at an old picture, and they go, "I used to be good looking," or something like that. I think sin works that way.
Yeah. Distorts
you
the
don't
vision.
See the wrinkles and the aging that it's doing to you.
Yeah.
If you speaking, if you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
And then realizing when you do finally wake up and you look in the mirror and you go, "Oh my!" Then waiting on God and trying to find being patient with him and his cure, which of course ultimately is Christ.
Christ, yeah.
That's difficult. And I think Jeremiah and Lamentations bring a lot of that out.
Yeah,
Worth it in the end.
it's worth it. Reality, it's like when the doctor tells you, here's what you need to do, and you're like, so he goes, if you do this for 6 months, and you're like, well, can we just fast forward? No. You got 180 days to get there. You're like, well, can I just cram them all into one? No. Nobody likes to hear that. But I think this is why one of my favorite passages is Psalm, and Leslie, you can go ahead and cut it. Did you? Yeah. So by YouTube audience, or this